Welcome to a deep dive on Albania. We've got some Wikipedia stuff,
Yeah.
and we're going to use it to, kind of help everyone really understand this often overlooked country.
Yeah.
We're going to go beyond, just the basic facts, right? Like the stuff you'd see in a guidebook or whatever.
Right.
And we're going to give you a feel for Albania's history, its culture, what makes it unique, what makes it Albania.
It's really a place where East meets West in a lot of ways. You've got ancient history kind of bumping up against modern challenges,
Yeah.
and you get this really fascinating mix of influences.
So geographically, Albania is in Southeast Europe.
Go ahead.
Coastlines on the Adriatic and Ionian Seas. So we're talking beaches, sunshine, right, like that classic Mediterranean kind of vibe.
Yeah, you definitely get that.
Yeah.
But then you also have this rugged mountainous side to Albania. You've got the Albanian Alps in the north, which are like an extension of the Dinaric Alps that run through a lot of the Balkan Peninsula.
Okay.
And these mountains have historically made parts of the country pretty isolated,
Right.
which has contributed to some of the distinct cultural identities within Albania itself.
So our sources talk about Tirana as the capital and largest city, but there are a few others that pop up too. Durrës, Vlorë, Shkodër. What can you tell us about those?
Well, these cities, particularly Durrës, have been important centers for centuries. Durrës, for example, was a major port city during the Roman Empire.
Wow.
And that long history is still there, when you walk the streets today. So while Tirana might be the modern heart of Albania, these other cities give you a glimpse into, the deeper past.
Yeah, the past. The source material paints a picture of a country that's gone through some pretty dramatic transformations over the centuries. Like, Albania's political system has been anything but stable.
Yeah, it really has.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Albania has gone from a monarchy to a communist regime, and now it's a parliamentary republic.
Wow.
That kind of back and forth, a constant shifting of power, it's got to leave its mark on the national psyche, right?
Right. I would think so. The articles even talk about the transition from a centralized planned economy under communist rule to an open market economy after the fall of communism. That was in the early 1990s.
Right.
That's a massive shift, and I'm kind of wondering how it actually played out, for people. Was it a smooth process?
Not really. I mean, economic transitions are rarely smooth. Imagine a system where the state controlled everything, pretty much, suddenly giving way to, free market forces.
Right.
That kind of change can be really disruptive. And in Albania's case, it led to a lot of uncertainty, unemployment, even social unrest.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? It's one thing to change a system on paper, but it's another thing to manage the real-life consequences for people just trying to live their lives.
Exactly. And one of the most dramatic examples of this was the rise of pyramid schemes in Albania during the 1990s.
Oh, yeah.
These schemes, they promised, quick riches, and people, after years of economic hardship under communism, they were desperate for a better life, so they poured their savings, sometimes everything they had, into these schemes.
Oh, that's got to be tough.
Yeah.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. The schemes inevitably collapsed, and it left thousands of Albanians financially ruined. It was a devastating blow, not just to the economy, but to people's trust in the new democratic system.
It's heartbreaking, but it also speaks to the desperation people must felt at that time, trying to navigate such a turbulent period.
For sure. It's a reminder that the transition from one system to another is rarely a straight line.
Right.
There are often, unintended consequences, setbacks, and even outright tragedies along the way.
Okay, so we've talked about the modern challenges, but let's go way back to Albania's ancient roots. I was amazed to learn that this region has one of the earliest farming sites found in Europe.
Wow.
That really puts things into perspective.
It does. It suggests that, people have been living on and cultivating this land for thousands of years, long before, the rise and fall of empires that we often read about. And even before the farmers, there were the Illyrians.
The Illyrians, tell me more about them.
So the Illyrians were an ancient people group, and they inhabited a lot of what we now call Albania.
Okay.
And while their history is a little mysterious, we know they were a distinct group with their own language and cultural practices. In fact, a lot of scholars believe that the Albanian language, which is unlike any other language in Europe, is a direct descendant of the language spoken by the Illyrians.
So the echoes of this ancient culture are still present in the language spoken by modern-day Albanians.
Right.
That's incredible.
It is. It shows how deeply rooted Albanian culture is in this land, going back to, a time long before the Roman Empire or the Ottoman Empire, or any of the other powers that have shaped the region.
You know, when I think of Albania's history, one figure always comes to mind. Skanderbeg. He's
Yeah,
considered a national hero, right?
he is. Skanderbeg, whose real name was Gökçe Kastrioti, was an Albanian nobleman who led a resistance against the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. He was a fascinating figure, a brilliant military strategist, and he managed to hold off the Ottomans for decades, which earned him the nickname the Dragon of Albania.
It sounds like he was a symbol of defiance against, like, overwhelming odds.
Yeah,
Did he ultimately succeed in pushing back the Ottomans?
sadly no. Despite Skanderbeg's efforts, Albania did eventually fall under Ottoman rule, but his legacy lived on. He became this symbol of Albanian resilience, independence, and the struggle against foreign domination. His story is still told in Albania today, like a testament to the power of resistance,
Yeah.
the spirit of the Albanian people.
It's so fascinating how these historical figures become almost mythical, you know? They embody certain values and ideals that still resonate with people centuries later.
Right.
Skanderbeg seems to represent that indomitable spirit that you mentioned.
He does. And even though the Ottomans ultimately won, their influence on Albanian culture it's undeniable.
You see it in the architecture, the cuisine, even in some of the language. It's a reminder that history is rarely a clean break.
Right.
Even in defeat, cultures leave their mark, and those marks become part of, like, the tapestry of a nation's identity.
Our sources make a distinction between the Geg and Tosk Albanians. Who are they, and why is that distinction so important?
Well, for centuries, Albania has been divided by, this mountainous terrain. So travel and communication between different regions was difficult. And this separation contributed to the development of two major dialectal groups, the Gegs in the north and the Tosks in the south.
So it's more than just like a language thing?
Yeah.
It's like two distinct cultural identities within the same country.
Exactly. The Gegs and Tosks developed their own, distinct practices, traditions, ways of life. Think of it like regional differences, but amplified by geographic isolation.
Makes you wonder how these different groups, shaped by different things, ultimately came together to form this national identity, right? Right. It's a question that's still shaping Albania today. How do you reconcile these regional differences with this shared sense of, Albanianness?
Yeah.
It's complex, and it's definitely something we'll explore more as we look deeper into Albania's culture.
Our source material mentions Albanian isopolyphony.
Yes.
It sounds pretty technical. Can you break that down a little?
So isopolyphony is a very specific, unique form of choral singing that's like a cornerstone of Albanian musical heritage.
Okay.
It's characterized by the use of drones. So one or more voices hold a constant note, and then others weave these intricate melodies around it. It's a haunting, powerful style of music that's been passed down for generations, and it's still performed today, especially in rural areas.
Okay, so it's a form of choral music, but with this added element of, like, the drones that create this really distinct sound.
Right.
It's interesting. Why is it so important to Albanian culture?
It's considered a living link to Albania's past. It's this musical expression that survives centuries of change and upheaval. In fact, Albanian isopolyphony is so unique and culturally significant that UNESCO has recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage.
Wow.
It's something Albanians are very proud of, and you'll often hear it at weddings, festivals, and other cultural events.
It sounds like more than just music. It's almost like a sonic representation of Albanian history and identity.
That's a great way to put it. It embodies this spirit of resilience, the close-knit nature of Albanian communities and that enduring power of cultural traditions. It's a reminder that even in a world of, globalized culture, there are still these unique and vibrant forms of expression that connect people to their heritage.
Okay, we've talked geography, history, even ancient roots. What about Albania today?
Right.
What are some of the major challenges the country's facing?
Well, one of the most significant is something often called brain drain. Since the fall of communism, Albania has seen this, like, massive exodus of skilled professionals, especially scientists and academics. They're seeking opportunities abroad.
Yeah, I can see why people might leave, especially given the economic struggles Albania had, transitioning to a market economy. But what does that loss of expertise mean for the country, for its future?
It's a huge problem. I mean, imagine trying to build a modern, competitive nation without doctors, engineers, researchers. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
This brain drain, It makes it even harder to develop the economy, improve living standards, and create, a brighter future for the next generation.
It's like this vicious cycle, right? Lack of
Right.
opportunities pushes talented people away, which then makes it even harder to create those opportunities. How do you even break that cycle?
It's not easy. It requires a combination of, investment in education and research, creating a more stable and transparent political system, and fostering this sense of optimism about the future within Albania. It's about convincing young people that they can have a fulfilling life in their own country, rather than feeling like they have to leave to achieve their dreams.
Speaking of Albania's place in the world, our sources mention the country's aspirations to join the European Union.
Right.
That seems like a major goal. What are the potential benefits for Albania if it does become an EU member?
Joining the EU could bring significant economic benefits. It would open up access to European markets, attract foreign investment, and boost trade. It could also provide funding for infrastructure projects, education, healthcare, and politically, EU membership would bring Albania closer to the, European mainstream,
Right.
potentially enhancing stability and promoting democratic reforms.
So it sounds like a pretty positive scenario, but are there any downsides or
Um,
challenges associated with EU membership?
there are. Meeting the EU's strict membership criteria can be a long and demanding process. Albania faces challenges in areas like corruption, rule of law, and economic development. And then there's the question of national identity. Some Albanians worry that EU membership could erode their distinct culture and traditions, that they might lose something precious by becoming more European.
It's like a balancing act, right? Trying to reap the potential benefits of integration without losing sight of what makes Albania unique.
Exactly. It's a debate that's happening not just in Albania, but in many countries grappling with the forces of globalization and integration.
Yeah.
It's about trying to find that sweet spot where you can, embrace the opportunities of the wider world while still holding on to your own cultural heritage.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've just scratched the surface of what makes Albania so fascinating. We've looked at the geography, the history, the challenges of transitioning, from communism to a market economy, and even delved into the ancient roots of Albanian culture.
Right.
And it's amazing.
Yeah. And in the next part, we're going to explore even more deeply into that culture, looking at everything from art and architecture to music, literature, and even the complexities of religious identity in a nation that was once officially atheist. It's a journey that's going to reveal the heart and soul of Albania,
Right.
this country that's both ancient and modern, struggling and hopeful. It's full of surprises.
We were talking about some of the challenges facing Albania today, like brain drain and the whole EU thing. It's clear that the country's past, especially under communist rule, continues to shape its present in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to just erase decades of history,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's something as, intense as a totalitarian regime. The legacy of communism it's still woven into the fabric of Albanian society.
Mm.
And it shows up in some pretty surprising ways.
One thing that stood out in the source material was the number of bunkers
Oh, yeah.
built during the communist era. Can you believe there are over 170,000 of them scattered across the country?
It's mind-boggling. It really speaks to the paranoia and fear that was just part of life in Albania under Enver Hoxha. The country was basically turned into this giant fortified camp, always expecting an invasion that, well, never came.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like to live with that constant tension, right? Like always looking at these concrete reminders of potential conflict. Did these bunkers serve any purpose after the fall of communism?
Some were repurposed. People got creative, but a lot of them were just abandoned. They became these eerie relics of a bygone era. You see them in fields, on hillsides, even in people's backyards. They're this constant visual reminder of a time many would rather forget.
Yeah.
But they also serve as this warning, I think, about the dangers of isolationism and authoritarian rule.
It's like a physical manifestation of the scars left by that period of history,
Yeah.
Like even when the regime is gone, the impact lingers.
For sure. And the transition from that closed, controlled society to, a more open democratic system, it wasn't easy. We already talked about the economic upheaval. And one really tragic example of that was the whole pyramid scheme crisis back in the 90s.
Yeah, this is a story that really shows how vulnerable people are during times of change. Can you remind us what happened?
So in the early 90s, as Albania was switching to a market economy, these pyramid schemes started popping up everywhere. They promised investors crazy high returns. And people, a lot of whom had lost their savings when the communist system collapsed, were desperate to improve their lives. So these schemes seem like, a fast track to wealth.
It sounds almost too good to be true. Were there any warning signs, like that these schemes weren't, I don't know, legit?
Oh, there were. But the desire for easy money, it can be so strong. And it often clouds judgment. The
Yeah.
schemes relied on getting new investors to pay off the old ones, and it was just a matter of time before the whole thing came crashing down.
And it did. What were the consequences for the people who had invested?
It was a disaster. Thousands of families lost everything. Their life savings, their homes, everything. The economic fallout was huge, but the social and psychological impact, that was even worse. People lost trust in the government, in the financial system, even in each other.
It's a cautionary tale about financial speculation and the need for regulation to protect people.
Absolutely. It's a lesson that, sadly, a lot of countries have had to learn the hard way. The promise of easy money it's powerful, and it's often during times of, uncertainty, like when a country's going through a big transition, that these schemes really take hold.
Okay, let's shift gears for a minute. Let's talk about something a bit more, I don't know, uplifting. The natural beauty of Albania.
Oh, yeah.
We mentioned the diverse landscape, but the sources go into more detail. Some of it sounds incredible.
Albania is a hidden gem for nature lovers.
Oh, wow.
You've got the Albanian Alps, stunning views, challenging hikes, and then there's Lake Shkodër, which is the largest lake in southern Europe,
Yeah.
known for its, crystal clear water and the wildlife.
That sounds amazing, like a dream for bird watchers.
It is. And then you've got Lake Ohrid, one of the oldest, deepest lakes in all of Europe. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, famous for its, unique ecosystem and all the different species that live there.
I'm picturing these pristine lakes surrounded by mountains, like something out of a postcard.
It's pretty spectacular. And then you have the Ahosy River. It's one of the last wild rivers in Europe. It flows for over 270 kilometers, totally unimpeded. It's a haven for wildlife, and it gives you a sense of what a healthy river should look like.
It's a good reminder that amidst all the talk of progress and development, there are still these places where nature is, thriving.
Right.
Places that offer a break from all the craziness of modern life.
And those places are becoming rarer and rarer,
Yeah.
which is why it's so important to protect them. And that brings us to the environmental challenges facing Albania.
Right, we can't just talk about the scenery without acknowledging the pressures, right?
Right.
What are some of the key issues that come up?
Deforestation is a big one. Albania has lost a lot of its forest cover in recent decades. Logging, clearing land for agriculture, even illegal stuff like gathering firewood.
And what are the consequences of that?
Well, you lose forest cover, you get soil erosion, increased flooding, a decline in biodiversity. It also makes climate change worse. Trees absorb carbon dioxide, so when you lose them, that's a problem.
So it's a problem with big implications, not just for Albania, but for everyone.
Exactly. And then there's pollution. Albania's industrial sector is still pretty small, but it's growing. And with that comes the risk of more air and water pollution. Managing that growth sustainably is going to be crucial.
It's that balance, right? Economic development versus environmental protection. A lot of countries are struggling with that.
It is, and it's not easy. But one thing's for sure, ignoring the environmental costs of development, that's a recipe for disaster. Albania has a chance to learn from other countries' mistakes and do things differently.
It's good to know they have national parks and protected areas.
Yeah,
Shows they recognize the importance of conservation.
they do. And they've also signed international agreements, to protect biodiversity and fight climate change. But actually doing something, taking action, that's the hard part.
It's more than just words on paper. It's about changing behavior, changing policies, changing how people think about the environment.
Absolutely. It's about creating this culture of sustainability where protecting the environment is seen as essential, not just a nice idea, but something we have to do.
So shifting gears again, I was reading about some of the demographics in Albania. It seems like they have a pretty unique population structure.
They do. One of the most striking things is the Albanian diaspora. There are more ethnic Albanians living outside Albania than inside.
Wow, I had no idea it was that big. What are some of the historical reasons for that?
Centuries of migration, really. People have been leaving Albania for a long time. Waves of emigration during the Ottoman Empire, then again during the communist period, and more recently, for economic reasons. There are big Albanian communities in places like Italy, Greece, Germany, the US, Canada.
It makes you think about what it even means to be Albanian when so many people who identify with that heritage live somewhere else.
It's a question of identity, right? Belonging. How do culture and heritage get passed down when people are spread out like that? It's complicated, but it's fascinating. And it's something we'll dig into more as we explore Albanian culture.
That culture sounds really rich, given everything we've talked about already. Where do we even start?
Well, Language is a good place. We already mentioned Geg and Tosk, but the Albanian language itself is really interesting. It's this example of linguistic resilience.
What do you mean by that?
Albanian is a language isolate. That means it's not related to any other language family in Europe. Scholars think it comes from the ancient Illyrian language, which somehow managed to survive centuries of Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman rule.
So it's like this linguistic island, a survivor.
Yeah. It's a testament to how strong Albanian culture is.
Yeah.
And the fact that this unique language has survived is a source of pride for Albanians. It's a symbol of their identity, their connection to history.
The sources also mention various minority groups in Albania. Can you tell us more about that?
Albania, like many countries in the Balkans, has a multi-ethnic population. There are Greek, Macedonian, Roma, and Aromanian communities, each with their own distinct culture and history.
I imagine managing those different identities within one nation can be tough.
It is. It's about recognizing minority rights, promoting understanding between different groups, and celebrating diversity while also building a sense of shared national identity.
It's that balance again.
It is, and it's an ongoing process. But the rewards are huge. A society that embraces its diversity is a richer, more vibrant, and more resilient society.
Unity without uniformity.
Exactly. And that brings us to another complex aspect of Albanian identity: religion.
Complexity seems to be a theme here. What makes religion particularly complex in Albania?
Well, for one thing, Albania has a history of religious diversity. Before communism, there were large Muslim, Orthodox, Christian, and Catholic communities. But under Enver Hoxha, Albania was officially declared an atheist state.
An atheist state. What did that mean? What did that look like?
It meant all religion was banned. Churches and mosques were closed. Religious leaders were persecuted. Any public display of faith was prohibited. It was one of the most extreme examples of state-sponsored atheism in modern history.
That's pretty drastic. How did people react to that?
Many practiced their faith in secret. Others just went along with it, either because they were afraid or because they genuinely believed in atheism. But, people need spiritual connection, so even during the worst times, faith persisted.
And after the fall of communism, what happened? Did religion come back?
It did, and in a big way. After decades of suppression, there was this huge resurgence of religious practice. People went back to churches and mosques, eager to reconnect and rebuild.
It's like faith was just waiting for the right moment to come back.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And this religious revival has added another layer of complexity to Albanian society. How did these different faith groups, after being pitted against each other, now coexist? How do you reconcile persecution with freedom of belief?
It's a delicate process, for sure.
Yeah, it is. But it's also a process full of hope. The fact that Albania has gone from banning religion to celebrating religious diversity says a lot about the human spirit.
We've covered so much in this part of our deep dive: the legacy of communism, the environment, the demographics, religion. It's a lot to take in.
It is. And in the final part, we're going to go even deeper into Albanian culture. Art, architecture, music, literature. It's a journey that's going to show us the creativity and resilience of the Albanian people.
It's been quite a journey so far, right? Exploring Albania.
It has.
We've covered the history, the natural beauty, the challenges, but there's still so much more to uncover, especially when it comes to Albania's culture.
Yeah, it's a heritage that's often overlooked, but it's incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
It reflects all those layers of history we've been talking about.
The source material mentions Albanian art and architecture as a good starting point. I'm imagining a real mix of styles, given all the different influences.
Oh, absolutely. You'll find everything in Albania. Ancient Illyrian ruins, Roman amphitheaters, Byzantine churches, Ottoman mosques, even some Italian-influenced architecture from the early 20th century. It's like a visual timeline.
Wow. Are there any specific sites or styles that really stand out? If someone's interested in architecture, what should they see?
Well, Butrent, down in southern Albania, is a must-see. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, ancient city with ruins from the Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and Venetian periods, all layered on top of each other.
That's like stepping back in time.
It is. And then you've got Berat and Gjirokastër, both UNESCO World Heritage Sites too. Berat is known as the City of 1,000 Windows, famous for its Ottoman-era houses, all these white facades and windows built into the hillside.
Okay.
Gjirokastër has a different feel, more imposing. Cobblestone streets, fortress-like houses, and this big castle that overlooks the whole city.
Two very different but equally fascinating examples of Albanian architecture.
They are. They both give you this glimpse into a way of life that's been preserved for centuries.
Let's move from the visual to the audible. Music. The sources talk about Albanian folk music as a really important part of the national identity.
It is. And just like everything else in Albanian culture, the music is super diverse. You've got the epic songs of the Geg region in the north, and then the more lyrical and melancholic melodies of the Tosk and Lab regions in the south.
So again, the geography and history are reflected in the music.
Yeah, it's all connected. And of course, one of the most unique forms of Albanian folk music is isopolyphony. That hunting choral singing we talked about before, it's still performed today. Weddings, festivals, you name it.
It's amazing how those traditions stay alive.
It shows how important they are to Albanian identity, that connection to heritage.
Speaking of heritage, let's talk about Albanian literature.
It might not be as well known internationally as, say, French or English literature, but it's got a rich history, a fascinating window into the Albanian experience.
Our sources mention Gajan Buzuku, a 16th century cleric who translated the Catholic liturgy into Albanian, one of the earliest written works in the language.
Yeah, Bazuka's work was huge, not just for the Catholic Church in Albania, but for Albanian literature in general. It helped standardize the written language and pave the way for, well, everything that came after.
And when we talk about Albanian literature, one name that always comes up is Ismail Kader.
Of course. Kader is, he's probably the most famous Albanian writer. His novels and poems are known all over the world. He's won tons of awards, including the Man Booker International Prize.
What are some of the themes he explores in his work?
Well, his writing is very much rooted in Albanian history and culture, but he also deals with universal themes,
Oh.
love, loss, betrayal, what it means to be human, especially under oppressive regimes. His novels often explore Albanian identity, the weight of the past, and the challenges of, like, balancing tradition and modernity.
It sounds like his work offers a really powerful look at the Albanian experience.
It does. Kader's writing it's powerful, it's poetic, and often pretty unsettling. He's not afraid to confront difficult truths about Albania's past.
We've covered so much in this deep dive on Albania. I'm amazed by how much there is to learn.
Me too. We've gone from ancient ruins to modern cities, listened to the music, read the literature. It's been quite a journey.
So for our listeners, what are the key takeaways here?
I hope you've gained a new appreciation for Albania. It's a country of contrasts, ancient and modern, beautiful and scarred.
It's a country that's still evolving, still figuring things out.
But it's also a country with a rich culture, proud people, and a story that deserves to be heard.
We encourage you to keep exploring. Learn more about Albania, its history, its culture, its people. You might be surprised by what you find. Thanks for joining us.